My brother didn't look at me when he said it. He kept his eyes on the arbitrator, hands folded on the table in front of him like he was praying, and he said, "She hasn't contributed a single dollar to this family in 11 years. I didn't move. The room was a beige conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Calgary, the kind of room where carpet goes to die. The blinds were half drawn against the afternoon sun, and someone had left a paper cup of cold Tim Hortons on the credenza. My brother was in a suit I didn't recognize. He'd gotten a haircut recently. He looked, for the first time in his life, like someone who believed he was about to win something. I let him talk. He had a lot to say. He told the arbitrator, a calm woman named Miss Hendricks, who had said almost nothing in 40 minutes, that I had been living off our mother's goodwill for the better part of a decade, that I'd borrowed money and never repaid it, that the deposits our mother had been making into a joint account we shared were not gifts, as I claimed, but loans I had been systematically refusing to acknowledge, that the $340,000 remaining in that account after her death belonged, morally and legally, to the estate, which he was contesting, on behalf of himself and our father. Our father sat 2 chairs down from my brother and did not look at me either. I had not spoken to my father in 4 years. I had not been invited to Christmas. I had not been called when my mother was first diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. I'd found that out through her friend Bonnie, who had my number from a birthday card I sent in 2019. My mother called me herself 2 weeks after the diagnosis, crying, and made me promise not to tell my father. She'd told me first. I kept that promise too. I kept all of them. My brother's lawyer, a man named Powell who smelled strongly of something woodsy and expensive, had submitted a 17-page document to Ms. Hendricks outlining the claim. I had read it 3 times on the flight from Ottawa. There was a section on page 9 that described me as, quote, financially dependent and professionally unaccountable, and I had circled it with a pen and then put the pen down and looked out the airplane window at the flat dark of the prairies below. It wasn't the first time someone in my family had said something like that. My father had started it really. The summer I turned 23, I told my parents I was moving to Ottawa for a job. My father asked what kind of job. I said I couldn't be specific. He laughed, not meanly, not then, just the way men laugh when they don't believe their daughters. He said, "You can't be specific or you don't actually have one." I said I had one. He said, "Because you know there's no shame in coming home. Your brother's working with me now. There's room at the company." My father owned a mid-sized residential construction company that had done well during the Alberta boom years. My brother had been the heir apparent since approximately birth. I had spent 3 months, the summer I was 19, interning there, and I had been told twice by 2 separate foremen that the owner's daughter should probably stick to the office. I had not stuck to the office. That had created some friction. I took the Ottawa job. I did not come home for Christmas that year. My father interpreted that as ingratitude. My mother sent me cookies in a tin shaped like a polar bear. Over the next decade, I came home when I could, which was not often. I called my mother every week, usually Sunday evenings when I knew she'd be in her reading chair with the TV down low. I sent money, not through an app, not in an envelope, but wired directly into the joint account she had opened for us when I was in high school and never closed. I sent it quietly. I didn't attach notes. I didn't ask for acknowledgement. She knew what it was for. She had told me once, quietly, that it helped with the things she didn't want to bother my father about. Medication, physio, a new furnace filter when my father kept forgetting to buy one. Small things. Then, after the diagnosis, not such small things. My mother was careful and precise and had quietly kept track of everything. I knew this because I am also careful and precise, and we had talked about it. I am a forensic financial analyst. I work for the federal government. My specific title and the specific branch I work for are not things I can put on a personal LinkedIn profile or mention at family dinners or explain in the middle of a conference room in Calgary while my brother's lawyer makes 17-page arguments about my alleged unemployment. The work I do involves financial crimes. It involves numbers that get classified. It involves sitting in rooms very much like this one, except with much higher security clearance and much less bad carpet, and it involves never ever flinching when someone in a suit tries to make you feel small. My brother did not know this. My father did not know this. Powell did not know this. What they knew was that I had not corrected them for 11 years, and they had filled that silence with a story that was comfortable for them. The story of the daughter who ran away and couldn't hold a job. The story of the money that went missing. The story of a woman who owed them something. I had let them tell it, right up until the moment it became a legal claim against my mother's estate. Miss Hendricks had been going through Powell's document page by page, asking clarifying questions in a voice that gave absolutely nothing away. She was in her late 50s, I guessed. Reading glasses on a chain. A legal pad with neat handwriting that I couldn't read from where I sat. My lawyer, a woman I will call by her first name, which is Adrian, sat beside me and did not appear concerned. Adrian had been my mother's lawyer first, which my brother had objected to in the opening remarks on grounds that I can only describe as feelings. Ms. Hendricks had noted the objection and moved on. Powell had just finished a particularly long passage about the joint account, implying, without quite saying, that the deposits I had made into it were evidence of my mother sending me money, not me sending her money, that the flow had been the other way around, that I had been draining it. He was good, I'll give him that. He knew how to arrange facts into shapes that felt like truth. My father nodded slowly at everything Powell said. My brother wrote something in a notebook and underlined it twice. Ms. Hendricks asked if the respondent had anything to add before she proceeded to the next section. Adrian placed her hand flat on the table once, a small gesture, almost private, like punctuation, and then she stood up. She said she'd like to submit a supplementary document package. Powell said he hadn't been given advance notice of any supplementary documents. Adrian said that was because some of them had only been cleared for submission this morning. There was a pause. Miss Hendricks asked what she meant by cleared. Adrian slid a tabbed binder across the table. There were 3 copies. Miss Hendricks took one. Powell reached for one and then stopped, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to touch it. Inside the binder was a letter, federal government letterhead. The signature was from an office most people have heard of but rarely interact with directly. I watched Miss Hendricks read the first paragraph. I watched her read the second. I watched something in her expression go very still. The letter was brief. It confirmed my employment. It confirmed my employment grade, which is several levels above what most people assume when they hear government analyst. It confirmed the nature of my work in terms that were deliberately vague but unmistakably serious. It confirmed that I was prohibited by statute from disclosing specific details of my role. It confirmed that deposits made to the joint account in question were consistent with personal income I had earned and was disbursing voluntarily. Then Adrian put a second document on the table. This one was from the Canada Revenue Agency. It was a summary of 11 years of filed returns. The numbers were, as one might expect from someone at my employment level, not small. My brother looked at his lawyer. His lawyer was very still. My father had picked up the letter and was reading it. He was reading it the way people read things, when the words won't arrange themselves into something they recognize. Miss Hendricks took off her reading glasses, held them for a moment, and then set them on the table. She looked at Powell. She said, "Counsel, I'd like to take a 15-minute recess." Powell said that would be fine. We stood. The room felt different than it had 20 minutes ago. The carpet was the same. The cup of Tim Hortons was the same. But the temperature had changed the way temperature changes right before weather. I walked to the window. Calgary was doing what Calgary does in October, sun and cold at the same time, the mountains barely visible through haze on the western edge of the sky. I had grown up with those mountains. I had stopped being able to see them from wherever I was stationed years ago, and I had quietly missed them in a way I never told anyone. Adrian appeared beside me. She said very quietly, "You okay?" I said yes. She said, "Powell's going to ask for an adjournment. He's going to want time to consult." I said I knew. She said, "Your brother looks like he's seen a ghost." I said, "He thought I was one." The adjournment was granted. 2 weeks. In that 2 weeks, I did not call my brother. He did not call me. My father called once, from a number I hadn't saved but recognized. The landline at the house, the same number it had been since 1997. I let it go to voicemail. He did not leave one. My mother had left me a voicemail once, about 3 weeks before she died. She had called on a Sunday evening, my time, and I had been in a debrief that ran long and I had missed it. I listened to it on the walk home. She said she was having a good day, which meant the Parkinson's wasn't too bad that afternoon, and she said she had been thinking about the apple tree in the backyard and how it had finally died, and she was sad about that. And she said she loved me, and she said she knew I worked very hard and she was proud of me even though she couldn't always say it out loud in front of other people. I had listened to that voicemail many times since. I kept it on my phone still. When the arbitration reconvened, Powell had a different energy. He was still precise, he was still suited. But the woodsy smell was gone, or I couldn't locate it anymore, and he sat down without the slight lean-forward posture he'd had in the first session, the posture that meant, "I'm about to make a point." He said his clients had reviewed the supplementary materials and were prepared to revise the scope of their claim significantly. Miss Hendricks said she was listening. He said they were withdrawing the portion of the claim related to the joint account deposits. Miss Hendricks said, "All of it?" He said all of it. Miss Hendricks made a note. Then Adrian stood up. She said that in light of the withdrawal, we were asking Ms. Hendricks to note for the record that the deposits in question totaled $312,000 over 11 years, and that this amount had been directed toward my mother's care costs, medication, home modifications related to her Parkinson's diagnosis, and household maintenance expenses that had not been covered by other means. She said we were also asking Ms. Hendricks to note that none of this had been disputed in the original claim, only mischaracterized. She said we were not seeking damages, we were not seeking costs, though we were entitled to them. We were asking for one thing, that the estate file reflect accurately who had provided financial support to my mother during the final years of her life, for the record, so the record was true. My brother was staring at the table. My father was staring at something I couldn't identify, not the table, not the window, not me. Something in the middle distance that might have been a version of himself he'd been comfortable with until about 15 minutes ago. Miss Hendricks said she would note all of that and that the record would reflect it. She asked if there was anything further. There wasn't. The session ended. In the hallway afterward, Adrian and I waited for the elevator. My brother came out of the conference room with Powell, and they walked toward the stairwell without looking at us. My father came out a minute later. He was putting on his coat, a heavy winter coat I didn't recognize, newer than anything I remembered, the kind of thing you buy when you've decided to take care of yourself. He stopped about 10 feet from me. We looked at each other. He was older than I had been tracking in my head. When you don't see someone for years, you freeze them in the version of themselves you last knew, and then reality corrects you all at once. He looked like my grandfather now, a little, around the eyes. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have," and then stopped. I said, "Yeah." The elevator came. Adrian stepped in. I started to follow and then paused. I said, "She kept everything, every transfer, every receipt, every note she wrote about what it was for." I wasn't sure why I was telling him this. She wasn't careless about it. She knew exactly what I was doing and why, and she never once made me feel like I owed her an explanation. My father pressed his lips together. It was the look he made when he was trying not to cry and had spent 70 years perfecting not crying in front of anyone. He said, "She always understood you better than I did." I said, "She tried to tell you that." He didn't answer. I got in the elevator. Adrian pressed the lobby button. As the doors closed, I caught one more look at my father standing in the hallway of that 14th floor conference suite, coat half on, and I thought, he's going to go home and sit in the house that still has a reading chair in it, and he is going to understand, maybe for the first time, that there were things happening under his own roof that he never bothered to see. That's not justice. It's not revenge either. It's just what happens when you spend 11 years deciding that silence is easier than asking. My brother texted me 3 days later. One sentence. It said, "I didn't know what was in that account." I read it twice. I typed back, "I know." He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. We had never been close in the way siblings on TV are close. We were close in the way that you were with someone you grew up beside, parallel, not intertwined. He had built his life in my father's orbit and I had built mine somewhere completely different. And the gap between those two things had slowly become, in my family's telling, evidence of a character flaw in me. But I knew something my brother didn't, and it was this. The money I had sent was never about proving anything. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't leverage. My mother had called me one Sunday in October 7 years ago and said very quietly that the prescription cost had gone up and she didn't want to ask your father because he's already stressed about the quarter end numbers. And I had said, I'll sort it. And then I had. And then I kept doing it because that's how it works when someone needs you and you're the one who can help and you love them. That's the part that doesn't fit in a 17-page legal document. The part about love. I went back to Ottawa on a Tuesday. The flight was delayed an hour out of Calgary, which gave me time to sit in the gate area with a coffee and watch the mountains through the floor-to-ceiling departure windows until the clouds covered them and they disappeared. My mother had a picture of those mountains on her bedside table. I had taken it on a camping trip when I was 12 and given it to her for Mother's Day, printed and framed at the drugstore for $8.99, and she had kept it there for 23 years without ever replacing it with something better. When I cleaned out her room after she died, I took the picture. It's on my desk now, in Ottawa, where the mountains are invisible. The glass has a small crack in the lower left corner from the move. I haven't replaced the frame. I don't plan to. At the gate, my phone buzzed. Adrian, she said the estate administrator had confirmed that the record had been updated, that the financial contributions were now correctly attributed. I texted back, thank you. She sent back a small thumbs-up emoji, which was very unlike her, and which made me smile. The flight started boarding. I gathered my bag, found my boarding pass, got in line behind a family with two small kids who were already asleep against their parents' shoulders. The woman at the front of that family caught my eye over her husband's arm and gave me the tired, specific smile of someone who has been traveling all day and is almost home. I gave it back to her. Then I found my seat, put my bag in the overhead, sat down and let Calgary disappear below me as the plane climbed east. I didn't do it to win. I didn't do it to be seen. I did it because she needed me and I could, and because she was my mother and the apple tree in the backyard had died and she was sad about it, and some things you just do without needing anyone to write it down. The record is correct now. That's enough. There's a version of that conference room I keep coming back to. Not the moment the envelope landed on the table, not Powell going quiet. Not my father's face when the words on that letter finally arranged themselves into something he couldn't argue with. The moment I keep returning to is smaller than all of that. It's my mother, on a Sunday evening, saying she didn't want to bother my father about the prescription cost because he was already stressed about the quarter-end numbers. That was it. That was the whole thing. That one sentence is what 11 years of wire transfers and silence came from. I think about cause and effect a lot, not in any mystical sense, just in the plain, practical way that anyone does when they've spent a career following money backward through time to find out where things went wrong. Every outcome has an origin. Every result has a chain of decisions behind it. Most of them small, most of them made quietly, most of them made by people who thought no one was watching. My brother thought no one was watching. My father thought the story he'd built about me was the true one because no one had handed him evidence to the contrary. Powell built a 17-page argument on the assumption that silence meant guilt. None of them were being cartoonishly malicious. They were just doing what people do when they fill in the blanks of someone else's life with their own assumptions. They made the picture that was most convenient for them, and then they defended it. What I had, and what they didn't account for, was honesty about my own life and enough clarity to keep records. Not because I was planning for a legal dispute. Because my mother had taught me, by example, that precision is a form of care. She kept every receipt. She wrote down what the money was for. She didn't do that to protect herself. She did it because it was true, and she believed the truth deserved to be documented. That's the thing I want to say plainly. Integrity isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the habit of doing the thing correctly even when no one is checking, even when the person who would most appreciate it is in a reading chair, 3 provinces away and can't tell anyone. I sent money for 11 years and never once told my brother, never posted about it, never used it in an argument when my father made a comment about me being unaccountable. I just kept doing it because it was right and she needed it and I was capable. The intelligence it took to do my job, to follow financial trails, to document accurately, to understand what evidence actually is versus what someone wishes it were. That same clear-headedness is what let me walk into that conference room and stay quiet while Powell performed his certainty. I didn't need to argue. I had Adrian, I had the records, and I had 11 years of doing things the right way behind me. You can't manufacture that in a recess. And the endurance required to go that long without acknowledgement, without credit, without even a Christmas invitation. That wasn't bravery exactly. It was just decision making. Every year I decided again that doing the right thing didn't require an audience, that my mother's comfort was worth more than being seen. The record is correct now. That's not a small thing. It's the whole thing. My mother kept a photo I took when I was 12 on her bedside table for 23 years. She never replaced it with something better. I think she understood something that the rest of them didn't, that what a person actually does, quietly, over time, is who they are. The rest is just paperwork waiting to catch up.